Well, good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to another of our Webinar Wednesdays. Boy, getting up there in these webinars, but we got a good one today. I know I tend to say that pretty frequently on a Wednesday, but buying and selling a business, always a very, very tricky issue, but an issue that is really a good, viable way for a lot of people to get into business. So we're going to get into buying and selling a business. We have a special guest coming in a little bit, Martin Hansen, and we'll give him a complete introduction when that's appropriate. So on with today's webinar, a little bit about us. I'm Kelly Bearden. I'm the director of the CSU Bakersfield Small Business Development Center. And we are part of a series of about 1,000 SBDCs across the country. These 1,000 SBDCs go coast to coast and in many of the United States properties outside of the US. And also, actually, of these 1,000 centers, they're all funded by the US Small Business Administration. So locally, we're part of the Central California Regional SBDC Network. And that includes 14 counties from Kern in southern San Joaquin Valley up to Mono County in the Eastern Sierra, over to the Pacific Ocean in the state of Nevada, in the central swath of the state of California. So we can cover the Central Coast, the San Joaquin Valley, and the Eastern Sierra. Our SBDC territory here from our office in Bakersfield, downtown Bakersfield, actually covers all of Kern, Inyo, and Mono counties. So a little bit about the SBDC is we work with startup businesses and we work with a lot of different clients, over 400 of them. We're gold on a lot of activities, 2 of them being actually really important goals as far as creating and retaining jobs from our actual clients. And our clients actually injecting and infusing capital in their business. And this capital can be in the form of a lot of different ways of debt, investment, and also grants into their prospective businesses. And as you see, those are a little couple of the graphs and show what our goals are set by the US Small Business Administration, and then actually the results that we've been able to accomplish with a lot of the really good businesses we work with here in Kern, Inyo, and Mono County. So our services, we provide high quality, confidential one-on-one business consulting. We do it with a variety of individuals, being staff, consultants. We have associate consultants that are part of our School of Business, which is the Business and Public Administration at CSU Bakersfield. So a lot of the areas that we work with get into the startup and funding. We do a lot of business plan work, some government contracting, and a lot of training and other issues. Our consulting team is seasoned yet very energetic. They're very well educated and experienced and specialized. And our senior consulting team is augmented, as I mentioned, by the associate consultants, our students that bring an entirely new dimension to the consulting application. So our website, if you would like to know more about what we do or to sign up for services in Bakersfield, here's our actual website. It's CSUB, and throughout our areas, you will find the centers throughout the Central California region at Cal Poly. You'll see Cal Coastal in the Salinas area, in Modesto at the Valley Sierra SBDC, and the Community SBDC in the Greater Fresno area, hosted by Clovis Community College. Our Wednesday webinar series, we're projecting to do 24 webinars, 2 a month, brings us to about 100. And next week, we'll be back next week with a very interesting webinar on America's $2.5 billion seed fund for creating innovative businesses. And that's a program called the Small Business Innovation Research. We got a great performer next week, Martin Kleckner. So join us for that webinar coming up a week from today on March 6th. Some of the tips for today on the webinar is there is actually ways that you can view the webinar in addition to, say, a desktop computer. Mobile applications are available for your phone or your tablet. it's best to download the Zoom software program for that experience. Oftentimes we'll have interactive polls and other fun. We're not going to do that today, but please submit your questions through the Q&A. If we don't get to your questions today, we will provide you an email response. Oftentimes our webinars, we have a lot of questions to get through, and we try to pick the ones that are most relevant for a greater group of individuals. So sometimes, you want to make sure that you get your question answered, particularly if it's a specific one. Let us know. We'll try to get back to you. So at the end of the webinar, you will be emailed a survey. If you would want your handouts from today or other information, I know we have kind of a nice little special today that we're actually being able to give away. So we will actually email that information to you as well, but please respond to the survey for that particular information. So, buying and selling a business. I'm going to be introducing Martin Hansen, and Martin is with Dealmaker 360, and I'm going to be doing that in just a minute. Martin will be doing the selling component of today's webinar. I'm going to just mention a few things about buying a business and some of the experiences that I've had at the Small Business Development Center, directing the center here for nearly 7 years, and some of the businesses that I've worked with over the years. So the pros of buying a business is a business has a track record if you're buying an existing business. So that can be very good from the standpoint of knowing the reputation of that particular business. We have review sites that you can review. The track record also can be manifested in the official financial history. So it's always good to be able to look at the financial history, and the official finance history is basically through tax returns. You're purchasing assets that might have been purchased at original cost, brand new, but now they're valued at the fair market value. Oftentimes that can be a lot more easier to actually finance one of these transactions than it would be at buying everything new and trying to do it as a startup. So a lot of good things about buying a business: the track record, the startup, and you avoid the startup expenses and the hassle of starting up. If you're buying the business, there could be a brand awareness. The financial information is available on the history of that business, and your assets are being valued at the fair market value. Okay, some of the cons of buying a business is the business has a track record. Now wait a minute, Kelly, you just said that was a pro, and that is correct. The business having a track record can be a pro, or it can be a negative effect on buying that business. Let's say, for example, the site doesn't have very good reviews. If it's a lodging property, those reviews could be on TripAdvisor. If it's on Yelp or Google+, it could be any other kind of business, from a food establishment to a nail salon. So having to overcome a negative track record, even though you're the new owner, could be a particular con. It could be a plus, because then it could be valued at a lower price because of it reflecting that negativity in the business. Another con that I've run into on almost every occasion I've seen a business for sale is that generally the seller thinks that the business is worth more than, in my opinion, it actually is. And this is pretty consistent, where you have a seller who values their business at more than is actually the fair market value of that particular business. So the negotiation process of coming to the point to where you actually have a deal can sometimes take longer, and oftentimes is manifested easier once time goes on and the seller starts to recognize that when they don't particularly sell that business. Okay, another con could be that the seller may have some information on the business continuing as a going concern. So the longer term prospects could be in jeopardy. What could be an example of that? Let's say you have a great location, and let's say, oh, the high-speed rail train is planning on going through that particular property. Maybe it's not going through your property, but maybe it's going to inhibit the opportunity for customers to get to your particular business. And it could be a million other things rather than the high-speed rail train, but that's just kind of an example that's easy to try to illustrate. So the seller might have some long-term ideas on who could be coming into the market. Maybe they've faced problems with a particular startup. Maybe it's Amazon, maybe it's something more specific, but they could have some information that they're not passing on as readily as they could. And really, when I talk to people about buying a business, you really need to look at it for the long haul. You need to realize that you're going to have a note to pay off from somebody, unless you're paying cash for that business, in 5 to 7, 10 years, and you're going to want that business to be around in 10 years. You know, it's always helpful maybe to go back over the last 7 to 10 years and see all the things that have changed, not only perhaps in the business that you're buying, but in that industry, and also some of the options that are available in that industry. So look at some of the trends that are happening, some of the technology that can be replacing that particular business or that industry. And then the last con is that difficulty is often the case when you're trying to find outside capital. And that would be because the loan payment of paying off the business makes it difficult then to cash flow that business and make enough money while you're doing that. So a few of the steps that we like to recommend that people do when they buy a business is, first, you need to find or locate an opportunity, and you really want to know why the person is selling. You know, oftentimes if there's family or a key employee, you know, there could be a really, you know, it's really a kind of a red flag if you really see family members and a employee or group of employees that pass on the opportunity to purchase a really good business. So you're going to want to meet with the seller or the representative of the seller and determine the feasibility as a new owner. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to plug your financial situation into that of the new business. So you would want to see how much money under your set of circumstances. Let's say you get a loan for $500,000 and you have that monthly payment in there. So how is that going to reflect based on the former results of that business that you have from those tax returns? And then in all cases, there is a ton of due diligence to do. And the due diligence is really, really important. And it's really important for you as a business owner to objectively look at the longer term consequences of that particular business. You're going to want to inspect records, accounting records, a customer list, accounts payable. You're going to want to see if they've had perhaps problem paying their bills. So you would see that on, you know, an accounts payable listing of money that is owed and how long it is owed. Consequently, you're going to want to look at the accounts receivable listing to see if customers that you have right now, if you have customers that pay by credit, that they are actually paying. You're going to want to see the customer list. Oftentimes it could be the personality or friendship of the owner or somebody who has been there a long time, why somebody will stay with them, and want to try to figure out how many of those customers are going to stay with you. So looking at all those records and charges in a tax return, you know, if it's a corporation, you're going to want to look at the corporation, but also you're going to really need to look at the person's individual tax return to see if other income and other businesses and other sources are coming in that are outside of that business that are really coming into that situation. Now, it makes it real difficult for a seller to actually provide that information, and many times they won't. Oftentimes that's a red flag, and you really need to kind of work through and try to get the information to where you can do a complete analysis to determine if this business is going to work with you. So Also, look at leases. Look at the assets being acquired. If you're acquiring any debt, look at that debt and understand how it's going to affect. If you have rolling stock that you're purchasing, like say a trucking company, you're going to want to look that those assets are not secured by any other type of arrangement. So you have that to look at as well. There's also contracts, contingencies. You want to look at your tax licenses, your payroll tax accounts that are with that business through the federal and state authorities, sales tax permits, some of your local permits that you might have and local licenses, and just look to see that everything is represented how it is being represented to you. And please, when it comes up to buying a business, contact the Small Business Development Center, and we can really assist you in a lot of the ways that are necessary for you to look at these deals and to give it a full look. Now, before I introduce today's speaker, our presenter today, who's going to discuss the selling side of things, and actually, you know what, I can introduce him right now. I do have a slide that's next, but it kind of makes this slide you're looking at right now mean a little bit more. And our presenter today is going to be Martin Hansen. And Martin is a graduate of CSUB Bakersfield with 25 years experience of providing advisory services to hundreds of businesses, from large corporations to mom and pop businesses with less than $500,000 in annual revenue. In Martin's words, he told me, "I have provided pro bono services to hundreds of community mom and pop businesses to give back to the community that has richly supported my work and my family." So in his years as a merger and acquisition specialist, we call him M&A specialist, he founded Aegis Bank Corp back in the 1996 and has completed nearly 590 transactions of either being on the buying or the selling end of things. So Martin definitely has experience in selling, and one thing he wanted to do was to actually go in and make it easier for mom and pop businesses and other businesses to actually buy or sell their particular business. And so Martin has created a software platform, proprietary for small business owners, called Dealmaker 360. He's going to talk a little bit about Dealmaker 360 and selling a business, and take it from there. He's going to actually give us a special offer today for attendees. And the special offer that Martin is providing is for free access to the Dealmaker 360 software for those business owners in attendance today that are looking to potentially sell, maybe not today, maybe not next year, but everybody's got an exit strategy. And everybody kind of wants to learn the valuation of their business and other things. And so to receive this code and to get there, you'll need to respond to our email survey that I talked about a few minutes ago. So with no further ado, it's time to bring in Martin Hansen. Martin, thank you for joining us. It's great to have you here today. And take it away, Martin.
All right. Well, thank you, Kelly and Elizabeth. Dealmaker 360, the Small Business Edition, is a software that's designed primarily for the small business owner. The software was created for the sole purpose of assisting that small business owner, because typically they cannot afford a professional, either M&A provider, an advisor, and or at times even a business broker, which typically charges a percentage commission based on the sale price of the company. So really what happened here was the software was created because as I was practicing my services here in Kern County and Fresno County and sometimes Los Angeles counties, I found that a lot of people were coming to us that had small businesses that were not able to find somebody to assist them with the sale of their company. And many times they would just either close the business down or they would sell off the assets, losing the value that they had created over all the years with their goodwill, the name of the business, and obviously the clientele that would come into the business and purchase either goods and services and or other obviously items of value. So that was the primary reason, is trying to build the software that the small business owner could use and utilize. And as I've said earlier, we've created the Dealmaker 360 software for the prime purpose of helping that small business owner. A lot of people don't realize that over 1 million businesses in the United States attempt to sell every year. And even probably more stark is the fact that 75% of those deals fail to actually close. Then, to make matters even worse, $35 billion is spent on transactional expenses annually here in the continental US. Nothing against Hawaii and Alaska, but a lot of transactions are not completed in those respective states. But nevertheless, it's a tremendous amount of money that's just spent to try and get transactions completed. And a lot of people don't also understand it's not necessarily finding a buyer. People think that it is, or you're arguing over price of the business. That's not either the reason. The primary reason that deals fail is because there's no transactional process that's followed by both the buyer and the seller. It's very anecdotal in nature. And so the Dealmaker software, what it does is it's kind of a metaphoric GPS that helps people guide through the process of selling the company. So we came up with a solution, and it's again, it's a fancy term. It's called the SaaS, but SaaS stands for software as a service. So it's a subscription. You pay for it monthly. So if you use it for 1 month, you only pay 1 month. If you use it for 3 months, then you pay for 3 months, and so on and so forth. The software is extremely interactive and it's very intuitive. We call it adaptive intelligence. It's AI, but not artificial. It's adaptive in that the software, as you enter certain items into the software, it actually reacts in a different way depending on what you put it in there. If you think that you're going to do an asset purchase, then it gives you a lot of information based on an asset purchase. If you say it's a stock purchase, it does the same thing for stock. It's extremely easy to use, and even inexperienced people that are not familiar with this trade can use this software. We've made it very much almost like a TurboTax or a QuickBooks, where it's very simple to use, and there's tutorials in there, and it helps people walk through the process step by step. Also, it has some interesting tools. It has a valuation tool. You can plug in certain numbers based on your business and how you've performed. And it can help you give a very, very rough, but nevertheless ballpark figure as to what the business might be worth. It takes you through the 6 steps of selling a company, and it helps you through each one of the 6 steps and tells you exactly what you need to do and how to do it. Then also, the seller can communicate directly once a buyer is accepted into the platform. It helps you communicate online with and through the program. So you don't have to be doing emails or text messages on the side. You can actually communicate with the buyer and the buyer's team members, if it's an attorney or accountant, directly through the actual platform, through the software. Very rare do SaaS-based models have that tool. And it's really overall, if you couple all those things together, again, it makes it for a very intuitive and interactive software. So what's the opportunity for the small business owner? Well, right now, people don't realize that there's millions of businesses in the next few years are going to be selling. And the primary driver of that is the baby boomers. The baby boomers are retiring. There's 10,000 baby boomers that are retiring every day, not every year, not every month, but every day. And a lot of those baby boomers, it's believed as high as 30%, are business owners. So huge opportunity for you to sell your business and find buyers out there along with the rest of the baby boomers and or youngsters if you're not a baby boomer. Dealmaker also, the software itself is helping the process. Again, as I said earlier, one of the goals and objectives for the software was to make sure that it targeted that small business owner that was reasonably knowledgeable. I mean, could get on a computer and it can go on Facebook or can use one of the apps. You can use Dealmaker. It's that simple, and you don't have to have any experience. And one of the other, I think, important components of Dealmaker that we really tried to emulate is we're very respectful of the wonderful products that Intuit has built and made, TurboTax, QuickBooks, and so on and so forth. And so we've tried to make it very simple, but as everyone knows, Intuit has done a very good job of making sure that the small business owner has proven that the small business owner is very capable of actually using a software. And it's become, obviously, whether it's, again, a TurboTax on a small business and or it's QuickBooks, has been a real value to that small business in helping it grow. So our target customer, who's going to use Dealmaker 360? Well, as I've said a couple different times, it's primarily the small business owner and your trusted business advisor if you're a small business owner out there listening. The business advisors can be anybody from a CPA to an accountant. We've had bookkeepers use it. We've had financial planners use it. Exit planners use it. We've had lawyers that are tax lawyers or transactional lawyers, and so on and so forth. So if you have somebody that is in your corner, let's say, and more than likely it could be a CPA or an accountant, which sometimes are a little different, you can solicit their help and their assistance. They can become a team member as part of the software, and they can help you through the process if you're having a struggle or an issue with one of the steps or one of the pieces of the software. You can always solicit their assistance. So they can be a real value added component to your ability to get that business sold. On the PowerPoint that you'll see, the Dealmaker 360 screenshots, you'll see some steps there. There are 6. The software actually, what you're seeing there in those boxes, it's called UX UI. It's actually changed a little bit. It's a little bit more modernistic now through the second version. But these illustrate, again, the steps that you have to go through. You prepare for your sale, which is probably without question the most important part of a business sale, is getting that business ready to be sold. Finding a buyer, believe it or not, is not as hard as people think. There's lots of websites and or marketplaces that you can post your business on. But you can post your business all day long, but if it's not ready for sale, you're not going to find any buyers. And if you do, the buyer, once he sees your business isn't ready to be sold because you haven't followed a process, they're going to walk away. Third is negotiate the terms. There's term sheets. There's components within that process that allow you to really narrow in on what structure makes the most sense for you. Is it all cash? Is it cash in a promissory note? Is it cash, a promissory note, and an earn-out? Are there covenants not to compete and things such as that? That step helps you through that, as will your lawyer. And or transactional assistant, an accountant. They can help you understand the tax part of that part of the transaction. It's very important times when you prepare your business for sale. You've got financial buyers, you've agreed from a tax perspective. The buyer look over your documentation. Do not try and do a transaction without an attorney. it does not make any sense. And in the end, it can get very bad for you. So again, I always recommend that you get a transactional attorney. And down the road, we're going to be able to provide you with a marketplace for each area in the continental U.S., excuse me, I should say the entire U.S., including Hawaii and Alaska. We're going to be providing you what they call Dealmaker, certified Dealmakers, and they're going to be lawyers and accountants and CPAs that are going to be able to, well, they'll not only know the software, but more importantly, they'll be able to help you with the transaction and the transactional documents if you don't have a lawyer. And then the final and probably most important part of this step, other than preparing for sale, is the close and transition. The close and transition is once all the documents are signed, what happens? Though the gentleman or the lady does not just hand you the keys, or you just don't hand somebody the keys, it's very important to have a plan. And that includes, but isn't limited to, making sure the utilities are switched over, lease agreements are handled properly, so on and so forth. There could be a purchase of certain vehicles or rolling stock, trailers, tractors, things such as that. You want to make sure that you have all the titles and so on and so forth. And there's a very comprehensive list of documents that you're going to need to make sure that you transfer over to the buyer if you're the seller, and vice versa. Sometimes the buyer will have to provide the seller some documentation, but close and transition is important. So those are the steps that I think are going to be very important for one to follow. And if you follow those, you got a much better chance of getting that deal closed. A couple of tools I had mentioned earlier. You have obviously a full library of documents that can maybe help you understand a little bit more about the practice. But again, you'll always want to go to a lawyer and make sure that you get those done. There's a valuation tool. I mentioned that earlier. Gross consideration is important. Gross consideration is if somebody offers you $1 million for your business, that's great, but that's gross consideration. That's not your net consideration. This calculator and document allows you to find out what your net's going to be. So it's very helpful. Of course, you'll want to use your CPA or your bookkeeper to help you understand the tax complications of the transaction and how those work, including, by the way, if you have a lawyer, sometimes the lawyers are skilled in tax as well, and they'll be able to assist you. There's a marketing website. It's a very exciting component of our software. What that happens is when you complete that, prepare your business for sale, it generates a marketing website for you automatically with all the facts and figures. And you can actually post that marketing website. It has a unique URL, and you can send that out to whomever you wish, and it describes your business, and it's like an executive summary. It's very slick. And then the snapshot is just a snapshot of your business. It just highlights some of the key components of your business and what your business does and how much revenue it generates and what kind of profits and how many people and so on and so forth. So a very important tool as well, just a snapshot of your business that you can send to people. So, you know, when you're selling your business, like you're selling anything, you need a competitive advantage. And I think that's important. The Dealmaker team, the board, and myself, we've completed over 600 transactions, and we've taken that expertise and experience and we've put it right into one software. So it's important to use the software in order to have that competitive advantage over other sellers of businesses that are similar to yours. You'll be better prepared, and your business is going to look better, not only on paper but physically as well. There really isn't any other transactional software out there that is designed specifically like ours for the small business owner. And that's an important component also, that it is really fundamentally there to assist and help you as a small business owner. And I just mentioned down the bottom down there, that's actually our attorney firm, and we're patent pending, and that's exciting as well, because a lot of times software isn't patentable. Because it's very similar to other softwares, but ours is very unique. So we're excited about that. 2018, we went through, when we first did our beta, we sent that out to 100 different people. We sent the MVP, which is the kind of the next product up from that. We did very well on that. We tested it, as you can see on the slide, over 100 different small business owners and advisors, closed lots of transactions. And so the product validation was completed very successfully. We went then into a different version, and we made some improvements due to some of the suggestions from not only the small business owners, but some business advisors. And we made those changes. And then we had an early user adoption and acquisition, and that was extremely successful as well. So software is up, it's running, and people are using it and using it very successfully. So some important maybe ancillary information is we're targeting some integrations and some affiliates, and what that simply means for you as a small business owner is we're going to be talking to all of these, if not, we already have over 5 of them. We already have had deep conversations with. We're going to try and integrate with them here in 2019. So if you're using a H&R Block, or you're using LegalZoom or Intuit, you'll be able to actually integrate our software with it. That's not confirmed yet, but we're certainly working on those right now. And so we're excited about that. Getting the word out, again, this is a very similar to what I just mentioned. It's just talking to people. We're going to trade shows, obviously. We're going to the internet, and we're really targeting the small business associations because we do believe that the small business owner is not only our target market, but they're the ones that we really want to try and help, because typically they're the ones that struggle with the expense of a transaction. So we're trying to make it reasonably priced at best. Pricing model, just so you know, it's $79 a month for the small business edition. The professional edition is not something for this particular webinar, but it's a little bit more pricey. But an accountant or a lawyer or financial planner, they can actually have up to 10 transactions going on the software at once. So if you're a CPA or bookkeeper or attorney or financial planner wants to get the software and then add you to it, they can certainly do that. But we're really wanting you to at least focus on that small business edition. We think that's going to be the best fit for the smaller businesses. And that's pretty much it. So, you can go on to Dealmaker360.com and peruse the website. It's got lots of information on there, and hopefully you can learn a little bit about transactions, understand a little bit about what it takes to get a deal done if you actually want to sell your small business, and how to go through the process. But I would highly recommend you consider using a tool that allows you to be successful in the end. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Elizabeth and Kelly.
Well, thank you, Martin. And we do have some questions. And thanks again. That's extraordinarily generous. When you show the pricing model, it really shows the value that you're offering individuals to get into the platform and go to use it and see the value that they're actually we're discussing today. So a few of the questions that have been popping in, and it's still not too late to get your questions in. Hit that question in the chat box and ask a question. We'll try to get to as many as we can. If we don't get to it, we can get to it later. But here's the first question, Martin. When I'm looking at selling my business, how long does it take me normally to sell?
Well, the typical time it takes to sell a small business is usually 3 months at the earliest, and usually 6 months. So 3 to 6 months. So a good average would be 4 to 5 months.
Okay, great. What is the best way to advertise my business for sale?
Well, right now, the best way would either be at one of the marketplace sites that are online. A couple of examples are businessesforsale.com, and you have BizBuySell, and there's a few others out there. Those are good tools. If you don't have an issue with the public knowing that your business is for sale, then it makes sense to look at Craigslist and other platforms such as that.
Well, that dovetailed perfectly into our next question. And that is, I want to sell my business in about 6 months. However, I'm really concerned about the confidentiality and about my suppliers and employees finding out, what are some of the precautions, or what is my best strategy for trying to keep it confidential but yet still trying to sell my business?
Well, I'll answer that question in two different parts. If you're using the Dealmaker 360 software, there's a provision in there that makes the buyer, when they enter the software, the buyer has to sign a confidentiality agreement. So it's built into the system. So before that buyer gets to see any information related to the seller, or even know who the seller is, they have to sign the CA. And as far as if they're not using the software, and just for general knowledge, it's very important to get a CA signed before you release any information whatsoever outside of what they already know, which is the reason they're approaching you. So if you're listing your business online, whether it's a Craigslist or it's BizBuySell or businessesforsale.com, you need to decide before you list, is this going to be a blind profile that you're going to put out there? So in other words, the profile of the business, or is it going to be public? So it's either public. So if it's public, you don't, confidentiality is important as far as the documentation that you're going to give them. If it's blind, then you want confidentiality right up from the start before they even know who the name of the business. I hope I answered that question.
I did. This is a unique question, I think, but it's can bankrupt businesses, if my business goes bankrupt, can we do an asset sale or other type of commercial property be sold through the platform?
Yes. With bankruptcies, whether it's a 7 or it's an 11, you have to get permission from the trustee and or the actual judge themselves, depending on the court. But if you can get the business onto the software in an 11, it works just fine. If it's a complete liquidation on a 7, you can do the same thing. You just have to get permission.
Great. This one comes from, I think, the buyer side of things, and it's, I've been negotiating with a seller for several months, but yet we're still very far apart on price. Is it usual for a buyer and a seller to be far apart on price?
Yes. And the reason that the buyer and the seller are typically far apart on the price is because the process of the transaction has not been followed properly. In other words, if you have all your facts and figures, you prepare your business for sale properly, you have your financial statements, you have all of your assets logged on an Excel spreadsheet, you have all of your payroll records, you have all your facts and figures, valuation comes down to a matter of risk. What is the risk of buying the business and what's the reward? And two practical people can sit down and figure that out. As I advise hundreds and hundreds of clients, if you have an unreasonable seller and you have an unreasonable buyer, walk away. There's another business out there for sale that's going to be similar. It's not worth the time. It's not worth the heartache and the energy you have to put into it. Unreasonable people are frankly just unreasonable. So.
Okay, great. And this is kind of tied along the same line, I believe. And that's, I'm presently a sole proprietorship. However, in the next 3 to 5 years, I hope to sell my business. Are there any benefits to incorporating during that process or during that time involved?
No, not unless that business owner perceives some kind of liability between now and when he sells and or she sells, which I just couldn't understand why that would be. But it's in today's day and age, it's a very litigious society. I mean, it's always beneficial and prudent, I think, if you own a small business to be incorporated and have an attorney draft those documents up and make sure that it's done right, because then you have some protection. The corporation and or the LLC becomes its own entity. You just happen to own the stock and or the membership units of it. Well,
here's a question, and thank you, Lizzie, for your question. In my business, I actually have cash under the table, and it's not being reported on my tax returns. Is that going to come back and haunt me someday when I sell my business?
Well, the answer is yes, in short. And the reason is I simply can't count the number of companies I've sold in which owners would keep the pink slips and pull them off the books of rolling stock, whether it's trailers or tractors or trucks and cars. And then when they go to sell the company, the cash in which they had pulled out of the company to buy those vehicles, it has to be something called normalized or recasted. It can become very complicated. So the answer would be, if I were that person, first of all, I would make sure that I ran everything through the business for the last 2 years before I go to sell. And yes, are you going to pay a little bit more in tax? Absolutely. But number one, you want to run the business legally, because anybody that's going to come in and buy the company that's legit typically is going to want to make sure that the tax returns match the financial statements, or at least come reasonably close. So if it's a cash business, I would suggest within a couple of years of actually wanting to exit, I'd make sure that I start running through the business all of the cash receipts.
This is a rather broad or non-comprehensive question, but handle it any way you want, Martin. You're on your own on this one. I'm looking to buy a business and I've started the due diligence process. What should the due diligence process consist of?
Well, the due diligence process, I would say, generally speaking, is going to have 4 prime components. First is the financials. In other words, the mechanisms in which are generating the revenue and generating ultimately the profit, and how those numbers end up meeting. Number 2, any and all real property, whether it's leased or purchased. So if you have real property related to the business, you want to make sure you get your arms around that, because a lot of times businesses, their value is driven by the location of the property. Sometimes the property's a non-issue. It doesn't matter where the business is or the property is, but you need to get your arms around the real property. Third is the legal status of the business, making sure it's in good standing. It doesn't have any legal lawsuits against it. There's no employee lawsuits. In other words, the company or the corporation or the LLC or the sole proprietorship is clean. And then number 4, I would say, is all of the assets. What exactly is the seller selling? Is it are the values that the seller is asking for, are those reasonable values for each and every asset? In other words, if you've got a small auto repair business and you've got racks out in the showroom and you've got inventory on those racks, how new is the inventory? Is there obsolete inventory? Or where can you buy those racks for $10 a rack and he wants $100 a rack? And things like that, I think, Kelly, are very important to pull down. So those would be the 4 prime components that I would consider important in due diligence. And then there could be a multitude of others depending on the type of business. I mean, if you have a mining or you have an IT business, you have a professional practice, then there's a multitude of different things that I would probably change. But in general, I would say that's accurate.
Boy, you guys are on your game today. You guys cannot stump Martin and keep these questions coming. Closing. We're almost at closing on the sale of the business. Are there any closing issues that might still come up, or is there anything that we should be aware of?
Well, hopefully this particular individual has legal counsel, because a lot of times you have to make sure that you run searches on liens on the assets that you're purchasing. You want to make sure that they're clean and clear and that there's no issues there. You have to also make sure that there's, if that particular seller has been through a divorce, you want to make sure that that there's a divorce decree that allows this person to sell the assets. Obviously, you want to make sure that you transfer all of the utilities and all the other services that the seller is receiving. A lot of times they'll have their personal cable boxes paid for by the company. In the company's name, you have all kinds of utility services that can be actually transferred over to a company name. So make sure that all of that is out of the seller's name before they close the deal. Things such as that I think are important. The checklist on Dealmaker 360 is very comprehensive, and it covers just about every industry. And I think if you go through that list, you'll find that you're going to catch most of the things.
Great. Here's a gentleman who looks, or a lady, who looks to be selling their business in the next couple of years as part of an ESOP, an employee stock ownership purchase, or some type of other employee agreement. Are there any recommendations you can give me on selling the business to an employee-led organization?
Well, the key as it relates to ESOPs, and you're a couple years away, is actually twofold. One is by using Dealmaker 360, you can actually prepare that business to be reviewed ultimately and then valued by an ESOP. So that's important. Companies, a lot of times people will say, well, let's just value the business. You don't want to try and sell your home at 3:30 in the afternoon on a school day. The house is a disaster. You got 4 kids running through the house. Your wife just got home from work. No, it's a mess, right? So your house is not staged properly. So the value ultimately is not going to be able to be seen by a third party. Same thing with the business. You want to make sure that you spend at least 1 year, quite possibly 2, on an ESOP. Get that business ready to be valued in that second year, so an ESOP can come in and take an eyeball on it. But yeah, the Dealmaker software is still something that's very usable for that.
Well, they're trying to stump us, Martin. They're trying, but they're not succeeding. Here's a question. I'm looking to buy a business, and it's right around the $250,000 range, and I'm having problems finding conventional type of funding. Is the seller financed agreement common in these types of transactions?
Yes. Yes, in fact, it's not common, it's typical. Many times the buyer is going to require seller financed paper. And I would always suggest that you make sure that you have a lawyer look at that and make sure that it's a secure promissory note, not just on the assets that you're purchasing, but it should the buyer should also more than likely have a personal guarantee as well. But you have to make sure that that personal guarantee isn't extended out to another bank, because if it is, then the seller of the business is going to be what they call second in line. And when you're second in line, you're second in line. So the bank would get a bite at the apple first, and then you get the second bite. And sometimes there's nothing left. So make sure that you have counsel.
Our next question has to do with the covenant not to compete. The buyer is requesting that I sign the covenant not to compete. Is that common? Is there anything I should put in there to protect myself if I want to do something later on?
Well, if the buyer is requesting a covenant not to compete from the seller, there has to be remuneration for that. The state of California does not recognize covenants not to compete unless, again, I'm not a lawyer. You want to seek counsel on this, but typically the covenant not to compete is not really enforceable unless the seller has been paid for that covenant not to compete, has received value for that. And it's part and parcel to the going concern. In other words, the buyer wants to keep the seller away from a particular area, geographic area, from a competitive perspective. So therefore, yes, they are typical. And many times what I would call a deal killer. If they don't get that person to say, I'm not going to compete against you, and they don't sign a covenant not to compete, typically that can be a deal killer. So be prepared.
Let's see this next question, and I'm trying to figure out how to ask this a little differently. And it's dealing with intellectual property. And a gentleman or lady wants to sell their business that has a considerable amount of IP. Is there any particular pitfalls, or are there ways that I can retain the IP and perhaps license that out?
The answer is yes. And again, that is a matter that needs to be taken up way in advance before that lady or gentleman tries to sell the company. They need to sit down with counsel and talk about what their options are as it relates to the IP and how they might be able to retain some of it. And again, as you just said, license it out. I've actually done multiple transactions, one actually with Turtle Wax, that is exactly what we did. But they need to seek counsel.
Next question is, I'm very interested in buying this business, but the seller has not been forthcoming with a lot of the books, records, and other information. Specifically, I want to see detailed listings of the customer list and also see the supplier list. Is there any way I can push that issue to see that before I make an offer for this particular business?
Well, a lot of times buyers request that information and sellers are very concerned about disclosing that, and for good reason. So typically what I would recommend is the buyer should request that the seller puts all of the suppliers and all of the customers on a list, but instead of putting their name, redact the name and just use a number and then put an amount. So in other words, this customer number one, I do $100,000 with. Customer number two, I do $50,000 with. Customer number three, I do $49,000. So on and so forth. Suppliers exactly the same. I buy from supplier number one this amount a year. Number two, this amount. That should get them to where the buyer is comfortable with the number of customers. In other words, it's not just one customer. It's not just two customers. Obviously, that kind of consolidation with customers is very dangerous. You don't want to have just one or two customers. So as long as the buyer is comfortable with the number of customers and is comfortable that the suppliers, there's not one prime supplier that's giving most of the product and or whatever they're buying, they should be comfortable making an offer. Then once the offer is made and accepted and you're in final due diligence, that's when you require and actually demand to see the list. Because at that point, you've signed either a term sheet or you've signed a letter of intent, and so you have real interest and you've been qualified and the buyer's been qualified and is ready to buy. Yeah, then they should be able to see those lists.
Okay, finally, I get to ask a question, Martin. Here at the SBDC, we see a lot of people during the year who, more often than not, are buying a business. And the common thing that I hear from them is that, as you alluded to earlier, is that price is a big factor in trying to get close enough to actually strike a deal. Is there something in Dealmaker 360 that helps a seller, I'm not going to say understand, but maybe reflects the value of that business a little bit better than without, say, Dealmaker 360?
Many of the users right now that are on the software have been recommended by the buyer. And why? Because the buyer wants to see certain information and wants the seller to walk or run through a process. And if they're not on Dealmaker, it's completely anecdotal. In other words, you're running a process that doesn't have real structure. So my suggestion would be, and I guess I'm a little prejudiced here, but my suggestion would be, if I was a buyer of a small business, I would say, and I was having that issue, I would say, Mr. Seller, I need you to go on Dealmaker 360. I'll split the cost with you, whatever you want to do. Have that seller then go through prepare the sell. They have to upload all the documentation. They can both go on the value calculator and take a look at it. Then they can see what other businesses are selling for that are that types of business, and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit fairer shake for both sides.
Okay, we have other questions that we're not going to be able to get to, but this one I've got to ask one more. And it has to do with goodwill. And goodwill, could you describe goodwill and how it actually fits into the process?
Goodwill is just simply the difference between the actual calculated value of the assets and the purchase price. So, I mean, in general terms, the best way goodwill should be viewed is it's the intangible value that you're going to get when you take over and you flip that sign around and it says closed to open. People are walking by that storefront. People know you're a safety company and you're very reliable. People know that you're a drilling contractor and you're very good at what you do and you have good hands. That's the goodwill. It's not the rigs. It's not the actual supplies that are in the store. It's the intangible value that you're getting when you buy a small business.
Okay, well, fantastic. Great questions and great answers. And some of the other questions that we might not have gotten to, we will try to answer via email in the coming days. So thank you much for everybody on that. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for this webinar. Our next webinar is going to be on March the 6th on America's Seed Fund, the $2.5 billion in innovation and grants from the U.S. government for small businesses. I want to remind you to please look at your survey, and you might want to put in your survey that you would like to get the access code for access to Dealmaker 360. So remember to hit that survey. Remember to put your information that you're interested in receiving that. And before we sign off, anything you'd like to add, Martin?
No, just please go on to dealmaker360.com and take a look at it. There's, as I said, even if you don't purchase the software, there's a lot of information on there that you can get, and it's for free. It's there's white papers, there's all kinds of documentation, and I wish you the best of luck.
Well, fantastic. Well, then we're going to wrap this thing up. For Martin Hanson and Elizabeth Hamlin, I'm Kelly Bearden. Have a great day. We'll see you on March 6th for America's Seed Fund. Goodbye, everybody.